is Toby Simon, and I'm the president of Synergia Foundation, a think tank that is based in Bangalore. Please allow me to welcome you all to the 106th Synergia Forum that we are having today. Today, we have 4 brilliant speakers amongst us who have agreed to share their insights. The first is Nobuo Tanaka, a friend of mine from the Trilateral Commission, and was the executive director of the International Atomic Energy Agency. The second is Mr. Ranjan Mathai, a former Indian Foreign Service Secretary and High Commissioner to the UK. The third is Vivek Ray, the Petroleum Secretary, former Petroleum Secretary, Government of India, and the chairman of Hindustan Oil Exploration Company. Finally, we have Nitin Prasad, the chairman of the Shell group of companies in India, who is here to give us international and industry perspective. Let me share the context. A few weeks back, I spoke to Ranjan Mathai and asked him to name a topic that was a concern to him, and he suggested that the topic of geopolitics of energy was on top of his mind. As a think tank, we always populate ideas by speaking and asking insights from experts all over the world. It was Tanaka-san then who added the latter part of the topic, the transformation towards a carbon neutral world. We're immensely fortunate to have 2 of the world's best experts representing the government in Mr. Vivek Ray and an industry stalwart like Nitin Prasad. Let me say a big thank you to all the panelists and the listeners. In the interest of time, I've asked Mr. Mathai to moderate the talk today, as he has extensively studied it. So without much ado, Mr. Mathai, please.
Well, thank you, Toby. I thought I would explain, as you said, the origins of this seminar lie in a discussion we had. And it followed from something Toby and I actually started talking about after an article I wrote in the press. And that was occasioned by 2 things. One was the International Energy Agency report of April, which spoke of the net zero emission ambition, as it is called, and how under this scenario, no new oil and gas investments were required worldwide, or could be accommodated in the world's carbon space. And second, the decline in India's oil production in 2021, which fell to its lowest level in this century. And we said, look, let's get together a group of people and let's talk about this. So it's more like energy and geopolitics rather than the geopolitics of energy per se. But since new energy is central to the IEA's project, I'm delighted that we have Mr. Tanaka, who headed the IEA, and I hope he can tell us what has changed since the time he was there, or even in the last 2 years, to make the IEA come up with a report which in the industry circles is seen as almost alarmist, but in larger civil society is seen as a very major contribution. The Shell chairman will bring, I think, to this the international perspective of a global oil company, which is being, as I read, pulled and pushed in different directions by shareholders and by courts and so on, and is struggling to maintain a balance and still doing very well. Mr. Vivek Ray, I must say, is, in my knowledge, practically the only Indian secretary who headed the petroleum ministry who gave an undivided focus on increasing India's oil production, making sure that the opportunities we had were not lost. And many of what are called the reforms which have come since all flow from work which he did. So I'm delighted that we have all these people. I will speak at the end on geopolitics, which some of you might think is the non-expert part of this discussion, because it doesn't focus so much on energy per se, but picks up on the topic of energy and says, what do we need? Where are we going from here? So Toby, I'll leave it at that, and we'll request Tanaka-san to set the ball rolling.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's a very great honor for me to be invited today. tonight to talk, all of you. Let me share the slides. I was the executive director of the IEA between 2007 and 2011. IEA was created at the first oil crisis in 1974. And the purpose was creating the collective petroleum security by strategic stockpile of oil. And IEA used it 3 times in the history. This is the price of oil. And the first one is the Gulf War in 1991. Then second is Hurricane Katrina 2005. And the third one, which when I was the head of the IEA, and the Libyan crisis. So in many times it's used to cool down the market when the disruption happens. But the big change of the last 10 years is the shale revolution in North America. So the United States is already the net exporter of gas and oil, while the big change in the demand is happening in China and India, these emerging economies. So in the future, most of the Middle East oil will go to Asia. 90% of the oil will go to Asia. So this is a huge geopolitical difference, so-called energy independence of the United States. When I met Henry Kissinger, who is the founding father of the IEA, he said, Mr. Tanaka, your job is to get India and China into the organization because they are the importers of oil in the future, while the OECD countries are importing less and less relative to these 2 major players in the oil field. And I tried very much. I visited New Delhi to convince the Indian governments to join. But now India is the association member. It's a kind of observer status to the IEA, together with China. But just recently, in 2019, India has officially requested to become a full member to the IEA. And this is a big subject for the coming ministerial meeting of the IEA next year. We'll see, but this is a huge change for the governance and the let's say, direction where the IEA will move. Another big change since I was in the IEA is that golden age of natural gas is starting thanks to the shale revolution in North America. And gas is very cheap and replacing oil and coal in the power sector. So emission is really seriously reduced in North America. So sustainability by gas and also security is the new energy perspective of golden age of natural gas. And what will happen in the next is the IEA said about 2 years ago, just before the COVID-19, it says in the past, oil is a major source of energy. But in the future, it's electricity. The future is electrified. Electrification is happening using more and more renewable energy sources. And this process has been very much, in a way, advanced or accelerated by the COVID-19. By the way, this chart is showing the oil and gas import dependency of different countries. The blue area is importer of both oil and gas, while green area countries are both exporters of oil and gas. China, India, Europe, Japan, Korea are importing more and more. So we are in the right and more to the right and above So getting less and less, let's say, independent, while United States move to the bottom and to the left means from the importer of oil and gas, it's getting exporter of oil and gas and joining Russia, Middle East. So their interest, US interest is much closer to this producer country. And that is the reason why US, Russia, and Saudi Arabia made a deal to at the, let's say, COVID-19 time to reduce their production together. So what China, India, Europe, or Japan, Korea is doing is try to use more renewable energy and try to stop the increase of importation of oil and gas, because oil and gas import comes from either Middle East, Russia, or United States, or Australia. So reducing these import by renewables is not only the sustainable or climate change policy, but more strategic energy independence, national security policy. So in a way, India, China, Japan, Korea, or Europe should work together much closer for the energy security and sustainability together relative to producer country like the United States, Russia, or Middle East. And as I said, the COVID-19 accelerated the process. It was a black April in 2020. The oil was hit hard by the lockdowns of the cities, and reduction of the demand was very serious. Only winner was the renewable energy. It increased even under the COVID-19 situation. And very interestingly, there are so many countries now announce the net zero by 2050. So Fatih Birol, the executive director of the IEA, is now saying he's getting more optimistic than ever about the world's ability to reach the Paris Agreement. Even the 1.5 degree seems less remote than it did a year ago. I was really surprised with his statement. And his argument is that the solar photovoltaic is the new king of electricity. The cost is so cheap that it's everywhere. And also the big change is not only governments, but companies, especially in the megatech firms, are announcing carbon neutrality, including their supply chain companies. So Microsoft, Apple, or Amazon, if corporations want to stay in a business with these megatech firms, they have to be renewable only company. So wherever they exist, they are forced to be carbon neutral, even by 2030. The countries announced 2050 targets, but Megatech requested 2030. And Sony has to live with that. If Japan is not enough supplying renewables, Sony threatened us by moving away from Japan. The Mercedes-Benz, now auto company, is requesting same thing. BlackRock, the financial sector, is pushing SDG investment. The TCFD is requesting disclosure of the climate risks. The financial sector's pressure is very strong. So it is a kind of demand side driven transformation is happening to the supply side. IEA says, well, maybe even with delay, when the world come back from the current depression or stagnation because of the COVID-19, the demand for oil may come back by 2022 or even as late as 2027. But what BP or some oil companies start saying the peak oil is closer than we think. And it may have happened already in 2019. And many European companies, Total, Equinor, BP, Shell, are moving faster away from oil. And it's slower. The major companies in China or Russia, they are the slow movers, but it's inevitable that even a big oil is moving away from oil. There's a risk of stranded assetization of the fossil fuel. And here comes the net zero by 2050 report. As Mr. Matai mentioned about the report, it was criticized that Fatih Birol announced that there's no new oil and gas exploration project is necessary from now. He didn't say, we should stop investing into the new oil field and gas. But if, as government announce the carbon neutral by 2050, the economic model of IEA tells us that it's not necessary to have any new investment for the new project. Rather, coal fire plants should go away and global electricity should be net zero by 2040. So this is the very, very surprising roadmaps or milestones for reaching the net zero emission target by 2050. I don't get into the details, but clean technology should ramp up by 2030. We cannot wait until 2050, but many changes should happen quickly. Like the wind and solar capacity should be quadrupled. Electric car sales should increase by the factor of 18. Energy intensity should decrease substantially. And this is the future direction if net zero emission by 2050 happens, is the supply mix for the future. And fossil fuel will be 20%, which is currently 80%. And what is the energy security when this kind of a situation happens? And IEA says, yes, certainly sometimes OPEC's share may increase, so the regional stability in the Middle East is still the issue for the supply, even though it is declining. And critical minerals for batteries is quite important for securing the supply. And also electricity system electrification needs the flexibility because of more renewables increasing. So there are many different aspects of energy security should be considered. And IEA is now thinking that important thing of the security is moving away from oil to more renewables or more balance of the different or comprehensive energy security, energy supply. And another important elements for the carbon neutrality is the very difficult current infrastructure, how to decarbonize the current infrastructure in the coal power or cement, steel, or trucks or cars. Mainly this power and industrial sector is very hard to decarbonize because the infrastructure needs years and years to be depleted. And especially it is true for the emerging Asia because this infrastructure, including India, is very new, relatively new compared to the developed countries. So how to deal with these existing infrastructure of the emerging Asia is a key element for the success of the decarbonization. And probably part of, and very important part of the answer is hydrogen. China needs definitely moving away from coal, very, very tough, even aiming at 2060. And Indian issue is that solar power is definitely increasing now. And if the sustainability scenario and net zero emission by 2050 happens, certainly much, much more solar will come. So the power sector's emission is not serious problem, but more the issue is new coming industrial infrastructure needs to emit more CO2. So how to decarbonize coming infrastructure in the heavy transportation and industry? That is the issue for India. So hydrogen may be the solution, as I said, and Japan was the leader of Toyota Mirai, the fuel cell vehicle, since 2014. But now it is more Europe and China, the leaders of the hydrogen, because they are getting more serious about using hydrogen in industry and heavy transportation segment. And European hydrogen strategy is remarkable. Japan is really shocked in a way and changed very much, but Europe is trying to build the hydrogen backbone using the current natural gas pipelines as a backbone for the hydrogen, replacing gradually natural gas to the hydrogen network. And this is a very interesting, but not only the power grid connection, but hydrogen connection could be the very interesting way to the use of food, use of the hydrogen. Japan, after the Prime Minister Suga's announcement of carbon neutrality in the last October, METI announced the energy outlook for the carbon neutrality in 2050. Yes, electric sector, power sector will be fully decarbonized, while lots of electrification by the renewables, hydrogen may happen in the industrial sector. And 14 priority industrial sectors mentioned, and lots of hydrogen is going to be used. Even the nuclear sector, nuclear power could be used for the hydrogen production. And so I'm saying maybe a golden age of hydrogen is now coming. Just as I said some time ago, a golden age of natural gas came, but maybe it's time for hydrogen. Yes, green hydrogen of renewables and electrolyzer is one option. Another option is blue hydrogen with natural gas with CCS. So many different regions in the world has a huge potential in the future. And it's just an interesting model of JERA. JERA is a joint venture of Tokyo Electric and Chubu Electric. This is the largest, thermal power company in Japan, and the largest procurer of natural gas or liquid natural gas in the world. And they are announced carbon neutral by 2050 by using ammonia and hydrogen. Means co-firing of ammonia, 20% of ammonia to their coal power plants, and eventually replacing by totally ammonia, and also replacing gas turbine power plant by hydrogen. So this is the way of using the current infrastructure of thermal power and by ammonia and hydrogen, clean ammonia and clean hydrogen, reducing the CO2 emission. So this model can be applied to the other Asian countries, including India. That is what Japanese government is now pushing and testing if the transportation from Middle East or from Australia or from North America can be applied by liquid hydrogen or ammonia or methyl cyclohexane. This is an organic hydrate method could be tested. Japan succeeded 50 years ago by making LNG as a global commodity, replacing oil and coal. But maybe now Japan should move to the hydrogen or ammonia, clean hydrogen or clean ammonia, to reduce further the carbon emission and make the hydrogen world possible. And there's a guy, Hirose-san, who is the former head of engineering in Toyota, is proposing the idea of hydrogen pipeline in Japan. Maybe this is an interesting idea. And also, I am saying that maybe this is the idea of pipeline network in the Northeast Asia called Nagpur. But I'm saying maybe it's not a connection of a gas pipeline, but the connection of the hydrogen pipeline may be discussed in the future. Russia is interested in selling hydrogen to Japan in addition to the natural gas. So this kind of pipeline connection of the hydrogen, just like Europe, could be considered in Asia. Of course, there's the idea of connecting power grid lines, of using to enhance the use of green, let's say, renewables. And some Masayoshi of the SoftBank already proposed this Asian super grid idea. But not only the grid connectivity, but hydrogen pipeline connectivity could enhance the global use and make the hydrogen economy successful. To make this kind of change, one issue is carbon price. And IEA's net zero 2050 has certain assumption. The carbon price should go as high as $250 per ton. In the emerging economies, in the major ones, $200. It's a very high carbon pricing is probably required to make CCS and full use of renewables. And Bloomberg New Energy Finance is ranking the countries, G20 countries, for adapting the carbon pricing policies. Yeah, Europe is moving ahead, while Japan, India, or other countries are thinking, but this is a really challenging for all of us. Last but not least, I just want to mention as a chairman of the ICEF Innovation for Cool Earth Forum, started by the former Prime Minister Abe. The climate change is not gender neutral. So if women occupied more numbers in the board of corporation or in the leadership role in the government, maybe we can move toward sustainability much more than before. This is infographics of ICEF last year. And there are many important technologies, SMR, small modular reactor, or battery, hydrogen, CCUS, or carbon removable, or digitalization. But the players, you can look at them, and it's only women who is inspiring and pushing the carbon emission reduction toward zero or beyond that. Finally, oh, excuse me. Finally, which this is my final slide, and IEA's net zero 2050 shows that if international collaboration cannot happen, we cannot achieve net zero by 2050, but it may much longer time to reach there. So priority of action of international collaboration is very important. When I read these 21 lessons for 21st century of Yuval Harari, he mentioned that there's three risks which we are now facing, that human being is facing. First is nuclear threat, the weapon proliferation issue. The second is this ecology and climate change. And the third is technical breakthrough by the AI. And we think these global issues cannot be overcome by the only one country, or the nationalism cannot provide us the answer for these global issues. Only global identity or international collaboration could have the answer. So I just stop here by the importance of international collaboration, overcoming the nationalism or populism for the future sustainability. And thank you for inviting me tonight.
Thank you very much, Tanaka-san, for giving us such a comprehensive presentation on energy, the future, the roadmap, importance of possibly hydrogen as a future source of energy. And let me now invite Nitin Prasad to give a perspective from what he sees is relevant from the industry. What are the challenges, that you think are going to be there? Probably a note on circular economy, if that is possible. And now I just leave it to you.
No, thanks, Toby. It's a great pleasure to listen to Tanaka-san's really wonderful coverage of all the challenges that the world has faced and will face. I think just if we just sort of reflect on how sort of Shell sort of sees this world, and we do welcome the statement on a net zero world by 2050. Actually, it fits with our ambition. We ourselves have declared that we will be net zero by 2050. And not only on scope 1 and scope 2, but we said that we will address scope 3, which is in our side of the house, 85% of our emissions. And that's quite an important difference, because it means that it fundamentally changes the nature of businesses and how we have to sort of start to work with not just governments and countries and societies, but we have to start to work with customers and consumers, and to be able to bridge between them, to be able to effectively decarbonize the usage of some of the energy solutions that are being done. And if we don't start to solve that problem, but on all of us simply focus on our scope 1, scope 2, then we run a tremendous risk that we are not able to actually solve the problem as we go forward. But I'd like to maybe sort of build on Tanaka-san's sort of storyline, and here the way I sort of see this is that the energy system has always been in a tremendous amount of transition. Every couple of decades, as Tanaka-san has very much outlined, there have been various changes. Whether it's the oil price shocks of the 1970s, the creation of the OPEC cartel, the new shale gas revolution, gas in general. There's been tremendous shifts that have happened, and preceding those changes, there has been a shift in the very nature that countries relate with each other in terms of how they choose to go forward. And you see, I think some of those dynamics already start to play out. And in fact, what I think we're starting to see now is two phases that will come back and emerge. Now to 2050, and then 2050 and beyond. And why I sort of characterize this is because I think the phase 1 that we're entering into, a 2050 phase, doesn't necessarily create the independence of energy or removes the necessity of geopolitics linkage to energy, but actually it just simply changes the nature of it and changes the nature of the various different players that actually exist over there. So let's examine this for a second, and then I'll talk about the phase after 2015. As Tanaka-san sort of came back and suggested that electrification is a big part of the future going forward. We've done our scenarios, and we would absolutely fully agree. But we would also come back and suggest that electrification is an interesting challenge, because energy so far has been a lot about the discussion of oil and gas, which is concentration of the concern in the product itself. With the electricity, that's no longer relevant. Electricity is a local issue. It's easily generatable. There's lots of different sources, so you don't necessarily have that challenge in the product. But what has effectively happened is that it has spread the challenge and the risks to both the demand side as well as the supply side. And the supply side, as Tanaka-san outlined, would be things like supply of critical minerals, whether it's lithium or cobalt or rare earth. This is creating new power centers, new centers of concern as well as opportunities for various different countries in the world. And you're already starting to see new relationships starting to get formed as countries start to see where is this going to be shifting. You also see the challenge on the demand side, as I mentioned, because that's where the scale challenges come up. And you have the challenges of where somebody like China has become such a dominant player in the renewable energy place and in the space of solar panels. And the sensitivity that the world has to China coming at this point in time to simply saying, I choose to charge you 10, 15, 20% more, you will see a massive surge in prices, electricity prices all over the world. because we are heavily dependent on for the next wave of projects coming in for all the solar panels and things that are coming from the low-cost manufacturing that is being done in China. And then there is the race to technology. And you see that being played out as the Europeans in particular have come to grasp that there's opportunities to be created to be able to become the technology provider, whether it's Europeans or the Japanese or anybody else. And we see that being played out as many different parts of the world are now coming back and suggesting that they want to partner with different parts of the country. So for example, if the interest that India brings in, India over the next 3 decades will account for 70% of the energy growth of the world and a tripling of the energy as compared to what we're consuming today. And that's assuming that we are about 3 times more efficient than the Americans were at an equivalent GDP, or twice as efficient as the Europeans are at an equivalent GDP. So we have a tremendous surge of energy ahead of us. And this is clearly being seen as an opportunity for other countries to come back and partner with a country like India. The one part that electrification it would have hoped, or for that matter, even that we would hope to have emerged, was the demand side. And this, unfortunately, the jury, I think, is still out in terms of is a demand side coalition group of countries being able to influence sufficiently the direction of the various sub-energy markets as they go forward. And that remains a challenge and a question. And you saw that actually in the last 2 years, as effectively, the entire oil price was controlled by the OPEC plus in terms of what they chose to do. And this is despite, as many countries choosing to air their concerns in openly or through closed door forums, and it was just simply not effective. So there is still that concentration of power. The one thing I will point out, and this is, as you look beyond electrification, because we are talking about net zero. This doesn't mean, as we saw from the charts, zero oil and gas. What it means is that there'll be fewer investments. And as we saw, 52% of that is starting to get concentrated in OPEC. And so some of our sectors, things like aviation, can start to become highly sensitive to the concentration of oil and gas resources in the hands of a few countries, which is a very big shift compared to where we were over the last 2 decades. It was a big shift having the US shale gas come in and effectively create a lot more demand and a lot more supply and a lot more supply sources. And now we're going to go back into a heavily concentrated world where again, the price will be determined by a few set of players. Now, I'm just going to close my points and suggest that where it will take us to roughly 2050. What happens after 2050? Well, there I think actually the world, it becomes a little bit more interesting, because I think I agree with Tanaka-san that hydrogen all of a sudden introduces not just a whole new set of opportunities and shifts. Granted, we have to solve some of the challenges and problems outlined, but in theory, it is true energy independence. It genuinely allows every country to come back and suggest that if there is a combination of renewable sources, biosources, hydrogen generation, green hydrogen generation, then you can start to see true energy independence start to come in. And that in itself will start, I think, to once again shift the geopolitics of the whole world in terms of the way that countries need to associate with each other as we go forward. The other things that are being worked on, and the reason you see a lot of effort going into this is, of course, taking a look at alternatives for battery technology. So a move away from lithium based sources to other sources, and more commonly and readily available mineral sources. And I think what you will start to see is as those technologies start to come in, that once again, when an energy system, which we've seen over the last couple of decades, concentration moving into the widening of availability of energy to concentration, you will again see a widening of availability of sources. And that'll create more opportunities and again allow for more levels of energy independence. As this gets played out, we've done this work from an India view and an India sketch and India scenario. But hopefully, I think you start to sense the challenges that necessarily in India will have in the immediate term, in the next 5 years, 10 years, but equally the challenges over the next, to the next 3 decades and beyond. And hence, I think the Prime Minister's call to action for ourselves and all our companies, at the Rampart, just a few weeks ago, that energy independence and driven by renewable energy and green hydrogen is going to be the way particularly forward. I would suggest that there is other things that will also come and back that, things like biofuels and other sort of common technologies, which will also provide a good base and provide alternatives for some of the different sectors. But these are all things that will have to come back and be developed. The part that is absolutely sort of key and essential, but also I think one of the bigger challenge that's there right now is how do we actually take all of this forward? Because the reality is that it is being incredibly difficult for any country to do it by itself. And equally, the ability for countries to collaborate and to be able to share technology and to be able to share financing and resources is one of the things that will constantly sort of come up. And you can hear that sort of being played out all through the different relationships that are being created. And what you're seeing is a navigation of different countries, I think, looking for different partnerships to try and create the different partnership structures. And whether it's the Europe or it's UK or it's the US, coming to India, or for that matter, Russia trying to work with China or Australia. There's many different combinations and that are being experimented and tested to come and see how we can find a set of partners that will effectively be the new aligned energy sources and in terms of working towards the next generation of technologies. Let me pause there, and I'd love to hear from the other speakers.
Thank you so much, Nitin, for sharing your thoughts. What the takeaway for us is that it would be prudent to have a basket of energy sources, because if you depend on one, as he has cited, as Nitin has kind of cited the example of China, that energy prices could shoot up. So it might be better to have a basket of energy sources so that we are always able to have some sort of a cap. Let me now invite Mr. Vivek Ray, who was one of the champions of energy production in India, on his thoughts of the way forward.
Thank you, Tabi. It's been great listening to Tanaka-san and Nitin. And their global perspective is certainly thought-provoking and very enlightening. I will focus more on India, because I think, we need to also look at the country's specific situation. And I think one takeaway that comes from Tanaka-san's broad overview is that every country will have its own transition program and transition path. And the transition path for a country like India would be very different from countries in Europe or countries in other parts of the world. So there has to be some degree of specificity as far as energy transition is concerned. And I think India certainly presents a very complex and unique case. Now, briefly, if you look at the latest IEA report on India, what it tells you is that India imports 40% of its primary energy requirements. Its dependency on imported energy is 40% overall primary energy consumption. The oil dependency is much higher at about 75%. And this is not going to change. This is going to remain at 40% in 2040 to 2040. So the import dependency of India on energy sources does not change significantly. And therefore, the complexity of securing supply chains, negotiating contracts, and seeking sources outside continues to remain. The net dependency on oil imports increases from 75% to 90% by 2040. So you actually see import dependence going up as far as oil is concerned. And you also see import dependence going up as far as natural gas is concerned. From 20% in 2010, we are at 50% today. And are projected to be at 60% by 2040. So broadly speaking, the Indian path and the Indian scenario continues to be highly import dependent. And we need to reckon with that. We need to come to terms with that, and we need to decide how to manage that transition, especially if if 52% of the resources are being concentrated in the Gulf countries and the Middle East. Now, one of the things that just to illustrate the way oil production and oil demand more than doubles by 2040, gas demand more than triples by 2040. Just vehicle per thousand population, vehicle ownership per thousand population. India today has about 70 vehicles per thousand population. The US has about 800. And I think China has something in between about, I get the figure somewhere, at 207. So if India goes from even 70 to 350 vehicles per thousand population, which is a 5-time increase, you're going to see a massive increase in demand for transportation fuel. Now, how much of that is going to be electric vehicles and how much of that is going to be non-electric vehicles is a $1 million question. We want 30% of all vehicles in India to be electric by 2030. Even assuming that we are still at 30, we get to 30%, the back calculations, the supply chain implications really haven't been worked out. So in the absence of greater clarity, going from 70 vehicles per thousand population to 350 vehicles per thousand population, which is midway to the US, which is not such a kind of unfair demand for the people of India, will have huge implications on transportation fuel and gas, because you could also be firing them on LNG or on CNG. And therefore, there's no escape from the fact that our demand for fossil fuels is going to be increasing substantially, doubling or trebling in the next 2 to 3 decades. The oil import bill and the gas import bills are going to be increasing, and our import dependency, broadly remaining the same, is going to increase as far as oil and gas are concerned. So that's the broad picture in terms of the overall outlook. Now, where do we go from here? That is the real issue as far as India is concerned. Now, if you look at our resource base, I will briefly take you through the resource base of this country. We have 26 sedimentary basins spread across something like 3 million square kilometers of area. And only about 50% of the basins have been appraised so far. It means that surveys, exploratory wells, etc., have been undertaken only in about 50% of the sedimentary basins. So there is sitting somewhere, or hopefully sitting in the remaining sedimentary basins, an untapped potential. A study by BP and IHS has assessed our resources our gas resources at 100 trillion cubic feet. That's something like 20 billion barrels of oil equivalent. So there is an assessment. I mean, all of this is not something that could be recovered, but there is a sense that there are resources waiting to be tapped, and we need a more vigorous exploration and development program. And this is something that goes counter to what the IEA is saying, where you don't want more investments coming into E&P. But I think for a country like India, we really need to have a policy framework which encourages investments in E&P and makes every effort to bring out every molecule of gas and every drop of oil that we can, so that we reduce our import dependency. Now, if you look at the production trends that was mentioned by Ranjan Mathai also, our production trends have been dismal. We opened up the E&P sector really to the private sector in 1991. And so it's been 3 decades now that we've been trying to bring in private investment through different policy regimes, the largest of them being the new exploration and licensing policy, which was launched in 1999. The NELP has actually not been very successful. And about 250 contracts which were signed, 80% of them have been relinquished by the bidders. They didn't seem it worth their while to proceed with those contracts. So that effort has floundered and hasn't really borne fruit. If you look at the production figures, which I have with me, our peak oil production was about a decade ago at 38 million tons. And today it's at about 30 million tons. So, over a decade, we've come down from 38 million tons to 30 million tons. Now, peak gas production, again, about a decade ago, at 52 billion cubic meters, is now at 28 billion cubic meters. So the last decade has actually been a dismal picture as far as our production of oil and gas is concerned. And therefore, the need to really do stock taking to come to grips with what's going on and to try and figure out how we go forward. Now, one of the most important and critical factors which come into play is the pricing regime, because the signals that the price sends out are the signals on the basis of which investment decisions are taken. As far as crude oil is concerned, we moved to more or less import parity pricing or trade parity pricing, I think in 2001 or 2, roughly 20 years ago. And therefore, on crude oil, there is no problem. When you produce a barrel of crude in India, you get the same price as the international marker, whether it's Brent or Dubai or a mix of the two. But on gas pricing, there has been a huge problem. And the gas pricing formula that the government has adopted from time to time have really underpriced a very scarce resource and therefore imposed a huge penalty on producers and therefore resulted in abysmal performance. I'd just like to quote 2 sentences, one from the IEA report of 2021. It goes like this: the relatively low level of gas prices over the past few years has, however, acted as a disincentive for significant investments in domestic production. Now, that's a pretty clear statement, and there can be no doubt about what they're saying. And in the recent book on gas, on all aspects of gas produced by a think tank, edited by Vikram Mehta, there is a good chapter on domestic resources by Rajiv Kumar of BP. He says, in quotes, while there is significant potential, it has not been realized due to suboptimal gas pricing policies, coupled with issues related to contract management. So you have, by and large, if you look at any literature on the subject, this is the bugbear, gas pricing. And while several steps have been taken to liberalize pricing regimes in the last 5 years or so, I think we really need to revolutionize the gas pricing framework. We need to reward the production of gas through remunerative pricing. Because if you see the E&P business, you can't be producing gas at $5 to $6 per MMBTU and be paid only $1.5 or $2 million per MMBTU. The current gas pricing at $1.79 per MMBTU for fields where the government controls pricing is about the lowest in the world. In an economy which is highly scarce, faces a huge scarcity of domestic gas. If you were a gas-rich economy, you could afford low prices. But in a gas-scarce economy, low prices is just beyond comprehension. So, I would say that the single most important policy reform that the country needs is on gas pricing. Several baby steps have been taken, but more steps need to be taken. And the gas pricing framework completely liberalized and left to market forces wherever the government is in a position to set gas prices. Some contracts, the government doesn't have a role, but a large number of contracts, 85% of the total gas produced in the country today is governed by this gas pricing regime. It's only 15% which escapes this regime. So that 85% of that regime needs to be liberated, as it were. And the animal spirit should be unleashed. So I would say that what also happens is that while some liberalization has happened for new fields and new production, where there is freedom of pricing and marketing, the legacy production is constrained by the old policy framework. And as a result, and the legacy production, which is the bulk of production today, there is no incentive for production enhancement, for bringing in new technology, for enhanced oil recovery, basically for more investment in increasing the productivity and output of the existing gas fields. And I think if you were to liberalize the gas pricing policy for the legacy production also, you'd create an incentive and reap quick returns through increasing the profitability and viability of investments in the existing fields. So besides the new production and the new fields, you really need to look also at how you can increase the output of the existing fields. And for that, the gas pricing policy needs to be liberalized, both for new fields and also for the legacy fields. I think I will stop here. This is broadly what I plan to say as far as India is concerned, and I leave it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ray. Can I now invite Mr. Ranjan Mathai to share his geopolitical thoughts on the security part?
Thank you. After listening to experts in their field, I hope the geopolitics will not sound like a lot of hot air. But let me just say that we've titled this, the geopolitics of energy in the transition to carbon neutrality. The route to carbon neutrality will affect global power plays, just like every single energy system in play in the world has been built around existing power relationships. And I think in terms of energy production and distribution, as also the terms of financing of energy and its trading patterns will all affect geopolitics. And in the rapid move to the net zero emissions, which Mr. Tanaka has introduced us to, I call it the great reset in energy. The newer technology and systems of production he has shown us, which are on the anvil. Now, these are closely held, and if they are not shared as part of a global cooperation, which we all would like, or we call it global commons, it would reinforce the dominance of the current major technological powers. We also are seeing new trading rules coming in, which could create protectionism by raising of carbon-related barriers, sort of border taxes. Already the EU has started with this. And this will again create a huge problem for what is called the global south. The global dialogue gets skewed as the debate shifts away from, in the climate talks, from what we had all agreed was common but differentiated responsibilities to simply sharing of the common carbon space in a very inequitable way. So this is one geopolitical element which I think we need to take care of. The massive increases in funding for the newer energy systems have, I think, not been spelt out in great detail by the IEA, or I think even I would look forward to hearing from Mr. Tanaka about that. The shift in the balance of power within countries as you move from one set of industries to another will play out also on the global sphere. As I see it now, this will strengthen China, the EU, and the US, and perhaps Japan. And the efforts to build the Belt and Road Initiative by China, as you see, there's a very important element in energy in this, and Tanaka-san's paper has expanded on it by saying even a new grid were to be built for hydrogen, it would run partly along the lines of this BRI. This is being countered by other efforts. Japan and India have talked about a bloc coming from the Indo-Pacific all the way to Africa. The Americans have talked about similar plans, and the EU also has plans for building greater connectivity. How will all this mesh together? The heavy reliance on critical minerals, which convert solar power into usable electricity and heat and light. I think we have already heard about this. We've heard about the increased demand of copper, nickel, cobalt, etc. I would like to say that transitioning from any form of energy in the atmosphere to usable electricity or usable heat and light will always require certain catalysts or certain agents. For example, hydrogen. Now, if this is touted as one of the very important elements in the future, I look forward to hearing whether the technologies are available to do away with iridium, platinum, and palladium, which are used in the electrolyzers. Suddenly, this could become an absolutely new bottleneck. The security of supply and volatility of price of some of these elements will again play a big role in geopolitics. The geographical concentration of the critical minerals, which both Mr. Prasad and Mr. Tanaka referred to, is even more concentrated than that of oil and gas. And as we heard, oil and gas is going to be higher than 50% very soon. Look at also the revenue streams which will emerge. I've seen a figure which says that in 2020, the total revenue stream from coal, fossil fuel, were around $400 billion. And the so-called transformative minerals was 50 billion. By 2040, coal will be down to 150, and transformative minerals will be hovering just below 300 billion. This money has got to flow into a very limited number of countries. What will this mean for the kind of relationships they are going to build? In lithium, cobalt, and rare earths, the top 3 producers control over 75% of current production. China alone is over 60%. And in rare earths, if you can include the processed rare earths, it's closer to 90%. How is the world going to manage this kind of a transition? Even with recycling, the dependence on supply chains, countries, regions, and if I may say supply routes will open a new era of geopolitics, which is why former President Trump came out with this critical mineral strategy. The EU has done the same. China has always had one. India has started up. We have created a company called Kabil, which will go out and look for critical minerals, but we are way, way behind the rest of the world. We'll need to catch up and make sure that these critical producers don't get locked into exclusive relationships. And that will mean a very, very big geopolitical set of alignments. En route to the carbon neutrality, or in case we are not able to get there, and why do I say we may not be able to get there? There was a report recently by JP Morgan, which said that both the funding and the human behavioral changes needed for decarbonization have so far been grossly underestimated. Decarbonization of electricity, we are, as we heard, on the technical horizon, but that's only 18% of total final energy consumption in the whole world. How are we going to manage for the more heavy transportation systems, for petrochemicals? Closing down oil and gas suddenly could bring life on Earth to an end, according to many observers. So it seems to me that we are more likely to be following the path of what is called the IEA's stated policies scenario rather than the net zero emission scenario. And that is where gas will play such a big role. I'm glad we heard from Mr. Ray that pricing has to be a very, very critical part of increasing our own production. And I think this fits in with our role in the Paris commitments, which we have already made. When we talk of oil, we are got to remember, we heard 50% will be concentrated in OPEC. When Mr. Tanaka showed us that lovely scenario map of how the oil strategic stockpiles have been built, how the IEA has functioned. There's one figure which I didn't see there, but which has always remained in my mind. In 1974, when the IEA was set up, oil's role in all fuels combined was 45 to 50%. And with all the changes that have come, it is still over 31%. It will decline gradually, but from 100 million barrels per day of production, we are looking at 67 million barrels in 2040. And the concentration will be in the Gulf and in Russia. And the geopolitical centrality of West Asia will continue. Eurasia will continue to be the main battleground of the world. And the Straits of Hormuz will continue to be one of the most vital choke points of the world. We have all heard the expression about energy security and shortage of supply. I have a personal experience of it, which, Toby, with a little patience, I am going to share. In 1990, I happened to be I was in Iran. I was the second in command there, and the ambassador finished his posting on the 1st of August and left. On the 3rd of August, Saddam Hussein marched in and took over Kuwait. The attack by Iraq on Kuwait took place. There was a sudden buildup, and as soon as the signals came that a war was on the horizon, the Straits of Hormuz became virtually a no-go shipping area. I, holding charge of that embassy, was getting frantic calls from the petroleum ministry, from individual heads of oil companies. In those days, they were all public sector companies, saying, can you please talk to the Iranians to make sure the supply of oil does not stop, the ships don't stop moving. In 1991, we went through this great financial crisis, which created a new India. It's often forgotten that one of the triggers of that crisis was the sudden spike in oil prices, and also the fear that we were running out of oil. In those days, we had no strategic stockpile, and our oil refineries also did not maintain the large stocks which they do today. That is what energy security is. If one day you do not have the fuel to run your vehicles and to man your security systems, then you are seriously in a crisis. I think the carbon neutrality is leading us to a more disruptive scenario, as I mentioned, with sharper geopolitical competition, even as global cooperation, as we heard from Mr. Prasad, is the need of the hour. And I think the focus on Atmanirbhar India, which the Prime Minister has given, should focus on all systems of energy, even as we cooperate with the rest of the world in seeking an answer to the challenges of climate change and to seeking decarbonization through mechanisms such as the International Solar Alliance, which we have taken forward. But at the end of the day, we will have to learn how to rely on our own resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mathai. Before I give the final word to Tanaka-san, we have one of the researchers, Kavita from Synergia Foundation, would like to ask a question. And I would also request Nitin Prasad, if he has an intervention to make or a question to pose to Tanaka-san, please do so.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Simon. I hope I'm audible to all the panelists. So my question essentially builds on what both Mr. Mathai and Mr. Prasad alluded to, which is about the geographical concentration of critical minerals and raw materials like lithium batteries, photovoltaic cells, etc. So I found this interesting because there is also an argument that renewable energy sources have the potential to, say, democratize energy supply because they are not susceptible to the same kind of energy choke points, geographical energy choke points that oil or gas may have been susceptible to. So for instance, you wouldn't have nation states or other non-state actors securing access to a critical sea lane and then disrupting oil supplies. So I'd like to gauge your opinion on how these two almost contradictory opinions would interact with each other and shape global power relations moving forward.
Tanaka-san, would you like to take a pitch on that?
Oh, yes, it's very interesting question, Kapitan. Very well put. As let's say, this critical mineral issue for the solar or new energy sources. And also, yeah, it's the renewable is much more decentralized supply system. So it is called democracy of the electricity. So some concentration in the mineral as well as deconcentration in the renewable sources is a very interesting contrast. I think that the critical mineral issue is very much seriously taken, especially on the assumption that current technology or business model stands as such. But our experience, Japanese experience with China of their, let's say, export control some time ago in the political situation, force Japan to look for the alternative sources in the other part of the world, and also alternative artificial or synthetic materials to replace some of the critical minerals. So in the short term, yeah, this supply restriction is an issue and price volatility may happen. But in the long run, the innovation will solve the critical mineral issue by the alternative sources as well as alternative technology. So I don't think it is a really serious issue for the supply side. Always, if the necessity happens, we may find the technological solution for that. Energy sources decentralized system is very interesting because of the renewables nature is very much decentralized. So how can we accommodate this decentralized supply with more centralized big nuclear reactor and supply by the national grid? It's very costly. So maybe if the renewable energy decentralized system is getting very cheap, I think that is the mainstream. And then the big nuclear technology or thermal power should accommodate with such change by the small modular reactor, more flexible system of the nuclear power, or using the hydrogen as a storage, and the hydrogen backbone pipelines may complement the restriction of the electricity supply. So this decentralization of renewable is a very important element for the democracy, but at the same time, we need lots of investment to stabilize the supply of renewables and increase flexibility by many different technology or innovation in the system. The demand side control, etc., is the other solution. And very important elements, I think, which many people mentioned, especially Mr. Matai mentioned about, is the demand side is probably very much decisive. I think, as I said, major megatech farms are requesting carbon neutral supply. Even Shell is trying to build the carbon neutral, including scope 1, 2, 3. And if that is the trends of global business, I think supply side should live with that. So the demand side will drive this carbon neutrality rather than supply side by pricing, by the demand. So maybe the global corporations and its supply chain companies will no longer buy the electricity generated by coal or even gas in the future. So how can supply side transform itself to live with these changes is probably major, let's say, geopolitics in the energy sector. The governments have certain role, nation states have certain role in setting these, energy security strategy, but the role of nation state is getting more and more limited because nation states with nationalism motive underground cannot solve these global problems. So I don't expect much happens in Glasgow for this COP26 meeting. Nation states cannot make a deal, impossible. How can we define the so-called, equal, common but differentiated responsibility in the technical and numerical terms? No way. That nation states cannot solve the problem. So it's more solved by this demand side through the market, or more global citizens who are more inclined to share the global identity. So how can we make these people together and solve the problem is a challenge. I don't have the good answer, but maybe, for example, I said gender. Women can play a much more important role to make peace. That's what UN Women is saying. And the countries with women leaders solved the COVID-19 issues much better than the countries with male leadership. So gender is probably another element on all over the world to cope with this kind of global challenge. And next, young generation is another big element. So ICEF, which I'm chairing, is calling for the young ICEF the participants in all panels and let them think about the future of sustainability together and make a recommendation for us. So that's another common stakeholders which may have common interests. So this kind of players or stakeholders other than the nation state will play much more important role in the future.
Thank you very much, Tanaka-san. We have actually overshot ourselves by about 5 minutes. But it's so difficult to cut short an amazing discussion. So sometimes you're tempted to leave it a little bit, but thank you so much. If anybody wants to make a 1-minute intervention finally, please do so.
If I could just come in on the question which was asked and which Mr. Tanaka gave the answer in very general terms. It's a very specific case when in 2010, the Chinese put export controls on the supply of rare earths. And the rare earths which play into the permanent magnets, which are today a feature of every single technology of significance, medical, missiles, telecom, etc. Japan came out and started looking for other partners. The India-Japan discussions on rare earths started in 2011 when I happened to be there. They went to Australia and they went to Malaysia. And this is where the new chain has been developed. There is a possibility of technology overcoming this, but in the short run, there is no getting away from the fact that if an export control closes down one of your industries, you are in serious trouble. There are geopolitical implications.
So on that note, again, thank you so much, Tanaka-san. Thank you so much, Ranjan Matai, Mr. Vivek Ray, Nitin Prasad, Kavita, for asking the brilliant question. We hope to reconvene again with more thoughts because this is very pressing and challenging. We don't have any answers for sure, but I think we will continue this to see whether we can provide more insights, which the Synergia Foundation always tries to do. Thank you very much.